Richard didn't remember when he gave up on intimacy. It wasn't a decision. It was a slow, silent fading. A few missed nights, a stretch of fatigue, a sense that he and his wife were simply growing older, growing quieter. They still loved each other, but the bedroom became a place for sleep, not closeness. What surprised him most wasn't the absence of sex. It was the numbness that followed, not just in his body, but in his spirit. He moved slower. He spoke less. He forgot why he walked into rooms. His mornings became flatter, his nights heavier. And somewhere in the silence, he started asking himself questions he never thought he'd ask. Is this it? Is this the end of being wanted? He told no one. Because who talks about sex at 70? It felt selfish, immature, indulgent. But during a routine visit while his doctor checked his pulse, Richard let the question slip. Is it normal to feel like I'm fading? The doctor paused, then asked, are you still being intimate? Richard chuckled. Not in a while. The doctor nodded, then said something he'd never forget. You should know, regular sex after 60 isn't just about pleasure. It's a biological function. And when it disappears, so do a lot of the systems that keep you alive. Richard froze. What followed was a flood of facts he'd never heard before. Sexual activity releases oxytocin, supports immune health, stimulates the vagus nerve, lowers cortisol, improves memory consolidation, maintains testosterone balance, preserves prostate health, and protects against vascular rigidity. But more than that, it keeps the nervous system engaged with life. Without it, the body begins to shut off parts of itself, not dramatically, not with a crash, with a whisper. And the scariest part, you don't feel it happening until it's already taken root. That's why researchers now call this stage the quiet shutdown phase. And if you've gone months or years without sex, the risk isn't just loneliness, it's functional decline, circulatory decline, hormonal atrophy, and slow loss of vitality that no vitamin can fix. Richard sat in stunned silence, and in that moment he realized he hadn't been losing desire. He'd been losing his connection to life itself. Richard didn't go home right away. He sat in the car for almost an hour, staring at nothing. The doctor's words echoed louder than the traffic outside. Sex isn't optional after 60. It's a vital sign. He had always thought intimacy was about pleasure, emotion, maybe ego. But now, for the first time, he understood it as something else entirely. Survival. He started researching that night, quietly, cautiously. Article after article confirmed it. People over 60 who remain sexually active live, on average, 5 to 7 years longer. They suffer fewer heart events, less dementia, they fall less, heal faster, even their sleep architecture looks younger. It wasn't a stretch of science, it was a silent truth. And it had everything to do with circulation. Sex activates nitric oxide in the blood vessels. It triggers heart rate variability. It stimulates blood flow to the brain, spine, genitals, and skin. It raises testosterone in men and estrogen in women, both essential for mood, muscle mass, and immune stability. Without that stimulation, systems begin to coast. That's why specialists now identify what's called the sensory deprivation curve. It begins slowly. Your skin becomes less responsive. Your breath shortens. Your reflexes slow. Then comes the mental dulling, the creeping apathy, the tendency to isolate, then rationalize it. Not because you're sick, because your nervous system misses touch. It craves engagement, rhythm, proximity. And when it goes too long without it, the body enters an energy conservation mode, shutting down reproductive hormones, trimming circulation, storing fat, and lowering repair signals. Richard looked in the mirror that night, really looked, and he saw it, the way his shoulders had started to cave forward, the dry skin under his eyes, the colorlessness in his lips. It wasn't age, it was inactivity, and not the kind a walk around the block could fix. It was something deeper, quieter, something that whispered, "You haven't been touched in a long time." That's when he understood. He didn't just miss sex. He missed the way it made him exist. Richard didn't return to sex overnight. It began with stillness, small rituals, touch without urgency, presence without pressure. His doctor had warned him not to rush. "You're not fixing a part," he said. "You're inviting the whole system back online." So Richard approached his body as if it had been hurt, not by injury, but by absence. Each morning before doing anything else, he placed his feet flat on the floor, sat upright, and rested his hands on his chest and belly. He breathed deeply, slowly, his 10 breaths, each one an invitation, not just to his lungs, but to his blood vessels, his nerves, his forgotten rhythm. Then he stood in front of the mirror. He didn't look for abs or youth. He looked for signs of life, color in the cheeks, heat in the fingers, softness in the belly. He let his hand trace across his own skin, not for performance, not for climax, for recognition, because that was the mistake no one warned him about. The belief that sex disappears because desire dies, when the truth is desire disappears because connection dies first. And if you don't feel connected to your own body, you stop asking anyone else to touch it. Richard began what researchers now call the sensory reconnection cycle. It's a therapeutic rhythm of gentle, non-goal-based touch designed to reawaken the sensory nerves and hormonal signals tied to intimacy. Especially after 60, the body requires deliberate re-entry into the landscape of feeling. He'd start with his thighs, then his forearms, then his neck. 10 minutes a day. At first it felt strange, mechanical, but then something happened. His fingertips grew warmer. His chest didn't feel as hollow. He noticed his breath slowing down naturally. His dreams became vivid again. His digestion improved. His voice had more range. His laughter came back. He even noticed how often he'd stopped humming. Now the tunes returned. Small things he hadn't realized had gone quiet. That's when he knew it wasn't sex he had been starving for. It was aliveness. And that aliveness didn't begin in bed. It began in his attention, in the way he treated his own skin, in the space he made for sensation without judgment. He still hadn't touched himself to finish. But every day he felt like he had retrieved something from deep inside, something long buried beneath decades of stress and silence. He was not trying to become who he used to be. He was trying to stay inside the body he still had, and that, more than anything, was what brought him back. It had been nearly 3 years since Richard had last made love to his wife, not because they were angry, not because they had lost love, just life. Her health had dipped, his spirit had dulled. They drifted into a rhythm of care and conversation, companionship, not closeness. And slowly the door to intimacy had shut. Not slammed, just closed, without either of them noticing. But something had shifted, not in her, in him. He wasn't chasing sex, he was chasing truth. The truth that his body still wanted to feel, and that she deserved to know it. One night, as they finished their tea on the porch, he spoke softly. "I've been doing something strange lately," he said. She looked over, puzzled. "What kind of strange?" "I've been touching myself, not that way, not to finish, just to remember I'm still here." She didn't speak. She waited. "And the more I do," he said, "the more I realize I haven't touched you in a long time. Not really, not like someone who remembers what your skin means." Still she said nothing. Then slowly she reached over and placed her hand on his. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let it stay there. That night they didn't undress. They didn't try to recreate anything. They lay in bed facing each other, eyes open, hands between them. And for the first time in years, Richard reached forward and gently rested his fingers on her neck. Not to seduce, to be there. And she let out a breath he hadn't heard in a long time. The kind that rises when safety returns. This was what intimacy looked like now. And it was beautiful. Not fire, warmth. What Richard had been learning alone, reconnection, presence, breath, was now entering shared space. He was creating what therapists call the second intimacy window. It's a phase couples over 60 often miss because they believe intimacy ends when performance fades. But in reality, it begins again, through presence without pressure. Their touch became slow, their silence became safe, and their nervous systems, once dulled by disconnection, began to listen to each other again. There were no expectations, no obligations, just rhythm, contact, permission. Because sometimes the most powerful intimacy doesn't come from asking for sex. It comes from saying, I want to feel you again, and I want you to feel safe in my hands. And for the first time in a long time, they both believed it was possible. They didn't call it sex. They didn't need to. What Richard and his wife found wasn't what they had in their youth. It wasn't wild or urgent. It was quieter, deeper. It came without pressure, without goal. It began in a glance, a hand resting on a forearm, a pause before turning out the light. They began to rediscover each other, not through lust, but through attention. Sometimes it led to arousal. Sometimes it led to laughter. Sometimes it led to nothing more than their legs brushing under the covers while they fell asleep holding hands. But each time something lived. Their skin came back to life. Their eyes lingered longer. Their hearts beat a little easier. But Richard realized was the real purpose of intimacy in old age. Not to perform, to preserve. To remind the body it's still welcome. To remind the heart it still has reason. To remind the nervous system it doesn't need to shut down and drift away just because the calendar says they've crossed some invisible line. That's why doctors now refer to this stage as the reawakening phase. It's the moment when couples over 60 stop chasing what was and start honoring what is, where touch is not a means to an end, but a daily practice of staying in the body, of staying in each other's lives. It's how the body knows it's still useful, still part of the world, still a source of warmth, still wanted. Richard began sleeping better. His balance improved. His skin, once dull, carried a faint glow again. His voice had more tone, his steps had more purpose. All because he and his wife had found their way back, not to the past, to the present. A shared breath, a gentle kiss, a quiet night with no climax, just closeness. That was enough, more than enough. So if you're over 60 and you've stopped believing your body can be touched without guilt, if you've started accepting silence as normal, don't wait. Reach, not for performance, not for proof, but for presence, because the body does not shut down because it's old. It shuts down when it no longer feels wanted. And you, no matter your age, are still worth feeling and being felt.